stay standing while we read the scripture together. Matthew 5, verses 38 through 42. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. As for the one who wants to sue you, take away your shirt, let him have your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks you, and don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you. You can be seated. Jimmy Lee Jackson grew up tending his hometown farm in a small rural town in Marion, Alabama. He and his family were staple members at St. James Baptist Church, where he was ordained as their youngest deacon at 25 years old. But things went sideways some 6 months later when he and his mother and his 82-year-old grandfather attended a nonviolent demonstration in their hometown advocating for their right to vote, which had been promised, but Alabama had never offered to them. State troopers took aim at the march, and when he tried to protect his mother from being beaten, Jackson was shot at point-blank range in the abdomen. He died from those gunshot wounds a week later, but the earth-shattering news of a 26-year-old Baptist deacon being shot by a trooper, that went viral, so to speak, for 1965, and that was the catalyst that sparked the historic Selma to Montgomery March. A march that marked the civil rights movement historically because it was thoroughly and consequentially documented in photographs and video that I was required to watch in Southern curriculum history class growing up for that very reason. Those photographs have now become an infamous representation of the American South in the mid-'60s. Photographs that marked the cover of Life magazine in March of 1965 and largely changed the public view of the civil rights movement sweeping across the nation. But the most notable photos were taken by a young photojournalist who was assigned the role because he was bottom of the totem pole at the local newspaper. And so his photos were the ones that are now marked in museums and advocated highly for how much influence they hold. This first one is known as the 2-minute warning. It's the picture as they crossed the bridge into Selma and the state troopers stood in front of them telling them not to march any further, that this was their turnaround point and they were not allowed into the city. Of course, they, knowing what their cause was, continued to stride right on past the state police officers, and that led to this second picture known as the beating. By the end of the day, 58 people, or at least, were injured from being struck with clubs and whips and cattle prods and tear gas. And that officially made this Sunday known in the civil rights movement as Bloody Sunday. What's fascinating, though, is that if you go back and watch the video, and be warned, they are brutal videos. But as you watch, is how the protesters, they never fight back. Those who can keep marching, and those who can't just kind of collapse and take what's coming. And that piqued my curiosity because at least I would think one person would go rogue. One person might just lose his cool and swing a punch back at an officer. I mean, I feel like that's what I might be prone to doing. So this week I did some digging as I was thinking about this story, and come to find out those marches, they weren't just open to anybody and any person's attendance. In order to go and participate in the protest, there was these entrenched requirements of training and participation where they would invite you to sit in diners and hire people out to come and scream in your face and yell at you and push you over because they wanted to intentionally weed out anybody who might risk their cause. On top of that, they invited you and expected you to sign what was called the Birmingham Civil Rights Movement 10 Commandments. And I know those words are small, but let me read a portion for you. It says this: I hereby pledge myself, my person and body to the nonviolent movement. Therefore, I will maintain and keep the following commandments. I will, 1, meditate on the teachings and life of Jesus daily. 2, remember that the nonviolent movement in Birmingham seeks justice and reconciliation not victory. I will pray to be used by God in order that all men might be free and sacrifice personal wishes in order that all men might be free. And it goes from there. But here's the crazy thing. It worked. I mean, not immediately and not without a notable amount of suffering. But as those images and videos spread, the country could not unsee peaceful marchers treated as enemies of the state, as some subclass of humanity that had less value than others. And that took what was a policy debate in large-scale government and made it personal. And a few days later, President Lyndon Johnson called for a voting right legislation, and by August of that year, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was formally signed into law. But here's the thing, as admirable and celebratory as that stride was in our history, embedded into these photos is a harsh reality I think humanity rarely likes to confront. One that even when we seem to squelch it in one place has this ability to then pop up somewhere else in an entirely new form. We humans, we have this knack for creating systems where certain people are placed over and valued above others. Some systematic ladder of worth to categorize other humans. And the problem is, once we can identify those that we think or at least deem are beneath us, well, it becomes frighteningly easy to justify almost anything we do to them. And then, of course, on the other side, we can find ourselves somewhere on the bottom rung of that ladder instead. And then the lingering question is, well, what do you do when that type of empowered hatred stands in front of you, or worse yet, over you, when that wounds you or humiliates you? Because I think the most general, natural response for humanity would be something like, push them back, get even. It's a tit-for-tat world, and justice lies at your fingertips, so stand up for yourself. That is the position of first century Jerusalem as we come to the Sermon on the Mount. They are wedged between two sides. On one side, you have the Roman centurion and Roman occupation that is oppressing the Israeli life and culture. And then on the other side, you have corrupted theocracy that is putting all of these rules and regulations. So what is the right response when someone with power weaponizes it against you? And look, there's no way about this, no other way I can get around it. Today is going to feel a lot more like a long-form Bible study than it is a sermon, but bear with me. We're going to push through it, and by the end, we will get some practicalities to it all. And halfway through, we'll bring someone up on stage to slap them, and that'll just keep you engaged up until that point with me. We are pushing towards the end of Matthew 5 as we walk through the Sermon on the Mount verse by verse. This is the part where Jesus is giving case study after case study, where he takes a commonly known Torah command and then reinterprets what it means in his kingdom as he fulfills that command. And up for today, vengeance and retaliation. Verse 38. You have heard it said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Now, if you've been tracking with us through all of this, you already know what Jesus is doing. He quotes a common law or an interpretation of the Torah, and then he presses beyond the surface level to a deeper wisdom underneath it. So here he pulls from Exodus 21. If there is an injury, then you must give back. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, bruise for bruise, and wound for wound. And look, I get it. That does sound like a rather brutal caveman-centric revenge system. You hurt me, me hurt you. I don't know, like that's the ethic of the way it reads to us. You take my eye, I take yours. But it is worth doing a little bit of contextual and historical study as we go into this text to understand where it's coming from and what Jesus is doing. So 2 considerations, a historical consideration and a cultural consideration. So historical context, this is not the only ancient Near Eastern law code that we have access to. It is comparable to a handful of other nations' law codes at the time. And look, I imagine that your favorite pastime is studying ancient Near Eastern law codes. So most prominently is one you may have heard of. It's called Hammurabi's Code. Anybody heard of Hammurabi's Code before? More in this service than last one. I'm proud of you. So let me read a portion of Hammurabi's code. It reads like this. If a man has blinded the eye of a member of the ruling class, his eye will be blinded. As it is stated, eye for an eye. Now you notice the similarities in content between this and Exodus 21, I'm sure, but do you notice the difference? Because there is a key difference between the two. Hammurabi's code puts clear contingencies based off of social order. If a lower class takes the eye out of a higher class person, the higher class person has the right to remove the eye of the lower class. Read on through Hammurabi's code, though, it doesn't turn the same way, vice versa. If a higher class takes the eye of a lower class, well, they just have to pay a fine. That's how the code plays out as you read. Meaning the wealthy and powerful, they could afford to do pretty much whatever they wanted because, hey, it's only going to cost them money. And guess what they had plenty of? Money. The notable part of the Torah is that it assumes every human bears equal dignity with no legal differentiation between rich or poor, important or unimportant. And then you can take that and frame it up contextually within the culture. Violence has this way of feeding off its own energy if it's not kept in check. I mean, already, my 1-year-old, if he so much as even tries to touch my 3-year-old and even does it a little bit aggressively, well, my 3-year-old is going to respond as death itself is at his front porch and he is screaming in total fear and losing it. And then he will strike back. And then that will build from there, lest Haley and I find some way of intervening into the two of them. And that's true for humanity as a whole. So in an ancient society, it has to be some sort of regulatory law to keep chaos from breaking loose into this downward spiral of violence, especially considering that ancient Israel was, in its primitive years, a nomadic people. That they were journeying, and prisons and correction facilities just don't bode well for nomadic people groups. The whole society is built on being able to be picked up and moved at a moment's notice, and turns out captive prisoners aren't all that conducive to that type of lifestyle. So in short, you have 3 kind of options. You can let people commit crimes with little to no legal proceedings. 2, you can try to just kill them on the spot, or maybe exile them, but exile in a land marked by wilderness is just delayed killing with a lot more suffering attached to it. Or 3, you can establish rules that will keep violence in check. In practice, the heart of the Exodus 21 command is not that things need to be treated like a playground and you need to let the teacher look away while you deal with it yourself. It is that when things escalate and get hostile, rather than seeking revenge or starting the detrimental cycle of one-up vengeance, you slow down, go to a court of law, and let a judge or counsel see to it that justice is done according to the crime. Now, all that to be said, this was an effort to put a cap on the human tendency to let violence spiral into chaos, but Jesus is still going to take the command, which was ancient even to him, and carry the whole thing forward. Because he's not just interested in restraining retaliation, he wants to form a people who are free from that style of retaliation altogether. So, verse 39, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. Okay, here's where things are going to get technical. So bear with me, someone's going to get slapped on stage soon. That's your carrot that I'm dangling while we move into some Greek technicality stuff here. But this does matter because when you read this on a plain surface English translation reading, it can almost sound like it comes across like, hey, look, when people try to hurt you, don't do anything. Just take it on the chin. So let me start with this really clear point here. This is not an endorsement that demands abused people go back to unsafe situations. And this is not Jesus telling oppressed people, hey, shut up and take it. That's what it means to follow me. This is not sanctified passivity. Because Jesus is going to go on and give 3 examples, and not one of them is him telling you to take a passive stance in the circumstances. We'll get there, but for now, let me just show you this phrase. I've translated a lot of it, but left some of the Greek in for you. It reads like this: eye unto eye, and tooth unto tooth. So the word anti or anti is a word that we still have in English. We use anti as a prefix that usually means against or opposite of. So if something is anti-freeze, it prevents from freezing. We use words like that. So it's the same here in Greek to some extent. It just has a little bit wider meaning to it. So anti can mean against or opposite of or that type of thing. Anti can also mean kind of in place of or against that thing. So Greek, it's so fun, right? Everyone loves Greek. Here's my point. This is why your translators will take this and translate it eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, because the anti here is to replace that which was already taken or to do in kind to that which was already taken. And so the thought is, Jesus then turns around and says, you've heard it said, eye, anti-eye, tooth, anti-tooth, but I say to you, do not anti-stenai. So now it's a compound Greek verb. Stenai means to stand, anti means against. Do not stand against an evildoer. But Greek interpreters will say that there's some intentionality here with the word anti and its meaning tied back to the previous two antis. So it's not just a flat, don't do anything resisting evil. It is more in concept and in context an idea of don't return evil in kind. You've heard it said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, don't repay evil for evil. That's what seems to be getting communicated here. This is why New Testament scholar N.T. Wright suggests the translation, don't use violence to resist evil. And even the CSB gives a footnote that says, don't set yourself against or don't retaliate against as possible translations. Here's my point. Jesus is not saying, roll over and let people take advantage of you and stomp you into the ground. He's also not saying match their aggression and hit them back just as hard. Contextually, he is saying, do not resist evil by becoming mirror images of evil. And to be clear, I've added that last part in through studied interpretation, but it is always worth distinguishing, and it does seem to match how Paul later picks up on this same command and applies it to churches. So he'll say in 1 Thessalonians, see to it that no one repays evil anti-evil. And he repeats the same sentiment in Romans 12. Do not repay anyone evil anti-evil. Jesus is not against the confrontation of evil. That's clear by his character and his mission. Jesus is not willing to let evil fester and have its way. He will stand in the way of it every single time. Jesus is concerned with the human propensity to become what we believe we are confronting. So what does that look like practically? 3 illustrations. We'll break each down into 2 parts. Cultural background, significance of Jesus' response. You tracking with me? All right, 3 of you. We'll keep going. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other cheek to him also. Now look, we're 2 millennia removed from this, but you can still kind of get the sentiment. Generally speaking, a slap is not about inflicting bodily harm on another person. It is far more about insulting someone's honor or dignity. And that was far more the case as much as it is today back in the 1st century, so much so that there is Jewish legal code written on this. So this comes from Rabbi Yehuda in Bava Kama 90. Rabbi Yehuda says, by the way, I wish his name was Yoda so bad. It's so close, man. If he slapped another person on the cheek, he must give him 200 dinars. If he slapped him on the cheek with the back of his hand, which is more degrading than a slap on the palm, with the palm, he must give him 400 dinars. So let's set up a hypothetical here, just to play this whole thing out. Let's say, I need a volunteer. Rick, do you want to be my volunteer or do you want to let someone else do it again? I'll let Rick come do it. He's in the front row and I'm courteous of your time. He did it once already. He'll do it again. So that's right. So let's set up our scene. You're a Jewish fisherman. You're bringing your fish to market in the city and I'm the Roman tax collector that sits outside the city. Now here's the problem. I am expecting taxes from you to enter the city. You do not have taxes because you have yet to sell your fish, which takes getting into the city. I speak Greek, you speak Aramaic, there's some things there, and we're having this conversation. You're not paying me, and I, seeing you as a Hebrew peasant, finally get so upset that I slap you. Now, Jesus is specific on which cheek. Which cheek does Jesus say? So which is your right cheek? Frame it for everyone to see. Okay? And I, as the vast majority of people, am right-handed. So what does it look like when a right-handed person slaps you on the right cheek? It is a backhand slap. Do you see the context that Jesus is picking up on right here? Now, I've done this. You have a couple options. You can fight or flight. Now, fight is problematic because I got 15 more Roman centurions right here behind me that they have whips and any right to just throw you on the ground and beat you in front of everybody. So fight is probably not in your best interest. The other option is you dig around, find what few coins you have, and shrink away defeated. Or Jesus gives a third option. He says, turn the other cheek. Now take that in its context, okay? So a backhand leaves you this way. Now what happens when you turn the other cheek? It is a relocking of eyes now. And if I'm gonna hit you again, how does the hit come this way? It's palm-handed. Now look, bear with me here. Thank you, you've done great. You can go back to your seat, Rick. Everyone give Rick a round of applause. So bear with me in the context here, but it does matter. A palm-handed strike was a strike seen as equals. What Jesus is saying in this illustration is not be passive and let them do what they want to you. Go ahead and turn the other cheek and let them hit you again. It is an invitation to re-dignify yourself, lock eyes with the person that hit you and say, all right, you want to do it again, but this time treat me as an equal. Treat me like someone that matters this time. It is not returning evil for evil, but it is also not laying down and submitting yourself entirely to whatever it has coming. It is a creative alternative resistance. I'm turning the other cheek and re-dignifying myself. Number 2, verse 40. And as for the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, let him have your coat as well. In Jesus' world, clothing was far more limited, and most people in the middle, lower class really only had 2 basic garments. You had an inner shirt, or what was called a tunic, or a shirt, whatever it may be called, and that was your day-to-day wear, that if you got hot or needed to work, you could take off your overcoat. And then you had your tunic, which was a much thicker fabric, and it was made to, keep you warm, and it even doubled up as a blanket at nighttime. People write about this. And so in Exodus 22, one chapter after the first verse that Jesus quotes, the Torah sets some clear parameters regarding the legal rights to a tunic. I know you don't think about legal rights to tunic, but it's in Exodus. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak as collateral, return it to him before sunset. For it is his only covering. It is the clothing for his body. And what would he sleep in? In other words, the Torah is already trying to protect the poor from being exploited by the powerful. Look, even if someone owes you money and they're having to give their cloak to you as collateral, it's your prerogative to go ahead and take that back over to them every night because they need that to sleep with, and their dignity of sleep is far more important than your financial compensation. But Jesus' case study here isn't about suing for the cloak, but for the undergarment. Meaning, Jesus is imagining someone who knows the legal boundaries of the Torah and is intentionally sidestepping those legal boundaries to find a new way of legally exploiting people. Look, the Torah won't let me take your tunic or won't let me take your cloak, but it will let me take your undershirt. So I'm going to go ahead and ask for that one, okay? No rule against that in the Torah. And Jesus says, okay, if they're going to play that game, go ahead and give them the cloak too. Again, that's not passivity. Jesus is not saying, let people take advantage of you and pretend it's fine. He is saying, go ahead and expose what they're after. Embody the shame for a moment. Strip down, hand it all over so that the one that is caught up in absurdity and greed and injustice, they're the ones holding the clothes, and you can say, all right, it's clear you need all of this more than I do. What is that? It's not resisting evil in kind, but it's not about using legal loopholes to exploit them in return. It's about exposing evil through creative, non-hostile resistance. Or number 3, 41. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. In Jesus' day, this was immediately recognizable. If you've been around church a while, you've probably heard of this. The phrase, if anyone forces you to go, is a Greek-Roman concept where a Roman centurion could demand you carry his things for a mile. And they knew that this was rife for abuse, so the legal command was after a mile, the Roman centurion had to pick up his stuff and go to the next person or carry it himself. This is the same word that gets used as Jesus is carrying his cross to Golgotha when he falls and the Roman centurion demands Simon of Cyrene carry the cross. Same Greek word that Jesus uses here. And again, this is a humiliating process. You're reduced to a pack mule, your day interrupted and ruined, and you're forced to assist this pagan who does nothing but mock you and your heritage. And Jesus says, when that happens, go the extra mile. Well, why? Per law, their power was limited to a mile. That means after 1 mile, you get your dignity back. Now, it might be a damaged dignity, but it's back in your hands. And Jesus says, the moment you're handed your dignity back, go ahead and use it to redefine the relationship. All right, officer, I'll play. I'll go the extra mile with you. And it's a second mile no longer defined by coercion, but an offer of relationship. An offer of something deeper. That's not passive. It's not you embracing evil and returning the favor with evil. It is embracing your dignity granted by your Creator and using that dignity to dignify another, even if they don't deserve it. And that is a demonstration of the kingdom of heaven. A people who absolutely confront evil. Don't mishear me. We are the church. We are here to confront evil in the world. We just do it without returning evil. That's the point. Jesus' kingdom confronts evil without returning evil. And please hear me on how hard this is. Because it takes everything we have to so often want to be like, well, that's the game they're playing. Let's use the same tactics. Let's employ the same things. Jesus gives 3 very realistic scenarios to his listeners, one that they would have innately known and quite possibly personally experienced. And then he calls them not to passivity, but to creative ways of resistance that does not return evil for evil. Turn the other cheek, give them your cloak also, go the extra mile. And look, we're 2,000 years removed. The likeliness of your boss backhanding you at work tomorrow, or your neighbors dragging you to court over your Carhartt, or the police demanding you carry his vest for a mile, that's about 0%. But we do know the feeling, right? To receive that email that comes with just enough passive aggression and anger that it spikes your blood pressure, and all you want to do is respond in kind. Well, clearly, if you read the first, or to catch wind of what he said or she said about your character and the innate desire to make sure everyone else knows, hey, they're the problem, not you. Or to have that coworker wield a company policy against you and gun for your job and go over your head, leaving you to play office place chess, wondering how you can now come out on top. And Jesus is saying that before you react to anything like that, slow down and consider, how do you resist the injustice without it spiraling into more injustice? How do you advocate for truth without matching manipulation? And how do you maintain your dignity while lovingly serving the other person that was against you? And that is not a call to passivity. And that does not mean you must always keep subjecting yourself to abuse or mistreatment. That is not the point here. It is to prayerfully consider how we might confront evil in a way that kills it in its tracks rather than letting it reproduce within us. And isn't that the goal? I mean, the goal has never been defeating the person doing evil. The goal is watching the kingdom of heaven invade earth and lay siege to evil itself while still preserving the possibility of redemption for those who are still held captive by evil. The goal of Jesus' kingdom is the redemption of creation and the destruction of evil. And Jesus has promised there is a day coming when he will return and he will eradicate evil once and for all. Sin, death, tears, destruction, and those who cling to it all will face judgment. But the commission of Jesus is not, cheer me on as I get ready for destruction. It's that we would plead for the redemption of those captivated by evil. and demonstrate to them the joy and abundance of that redemption that we've been graciously granted by the King. And part of that plea and demonstration is that we actually agree with Jesus. Meaning we believe evil does not just hurt victims, it does. But evil also deforms the person doing it. That turns out the Roman soldier backhanding the Jewish peasant is not free. He's powerful, but he's not free. And the person dragging you to court over your shirt is not free. The person wielding evil against you is not free. They are held captive to the very sin they willed. And Jesus came to set the captive free. And how did he do it? By absorbing the cost of love and subjecting himself to his own creation, not repaying evil with evil, and not even repaying evil with retribution, which is what he has every right as God incarnate to do, but repaying evil with love. Enduring a cross he did not deserve, to die a death that was not his to bear, but sacrificially given, that my sin might be cast as far as the east is from the west, and I might actually be set free. And the same is offered to you. And the same is offered to the person you hate most in this world. See, sin has this tendency to reproduce within us. It cycles generation to generation, contempt to more contempt, violence to more violence. And Jesus says, my kingdom's the stopping point. This is where evil gets defeated and freedom gets granted. And for those of us who've already been invited to live here, we are expected to long for that freedom to permeate this world, to, in a way, pray daily to be used by God in order that all men might be free, and sacrifice personal wishes in order that all men might be free. And that might sound a little familiar to you, because that was the covenant signed by a bunch of people that walked across a bridge knowing what lay on the other side of them, and knowing that they were going to march forward dignity intact, because the mission mattered more than their vulnerability and whatever the world would do to them. And in the one that helped lead that cause and walk across that bridge, Martin Luther King Jr., the ultimate weakness of violent retaliation is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it through violence. You might murder a liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence, you might murder the hater, but you do not murder the hate. Returning evil for evil multiplies evil, and adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. The invitation on offer, as Jesus starts in the Sermon on the Mount, you are the light, is that we might actually live as that light. And it might very well mean we suffer, but it does not mean we return evil for evil, and it does not mean we take on a full passive role. It means we stand against evil, and we trust that God does something through our non-hostile creative resistance. Because my King has this uncanny ability to take suffering and turn it upside down into redemption, and I can't wait to see what a redeemed Albuquerque might look like. Can you imagine what a redeemed Albuquerque would look like? Where people aren't marked by their drug addiction or the abuse that was enacted on them that they're cycling through, but they actually come find a place of restoration and freedom through the King that offers that by his grace. And Jesus has commissioned you and I to be the means to come and stand against the evil, for sure, but not against the person. And there's a whole slew of ways this has to parse out in lives. I get it. It is far more complex than every subject we can address from this. But it is to say, it is the goal that is clear. We resist evil, but we don't do it with more evil. No, we stand against it with creative reconciliation in tow, trusting that Jesus has a greater story waiting to be written. So how does he want to use you to write that story? We're going to have a time and we're going to sing Only a Holy God again. And I've chosen that song to remind myself and you that it is God's prerogative. That is his business. but he has commissioned you and me to be a part of it. And the question being asked is, what might your role be? That you and I would not be a people that stand against all of this or try to return evil for evil, but in a way that invites Jesus' kingdom right here into Del Norte and into Albuquerque. And look, if you've never had this story written over you, you don't know what it means for Jesus' redemption to be spoken over you, well, Kevin will be up here and he would love to talk with you more about that. But this is your chance to respond about what God might be calling you to. Father God, as we reflect on what it means to serve you and even to stand against evil in ways that do not match the cultural evils around us, but in a way that invites and puts a stop to evil once and for all and invites freedom and new life. God, would you show us your calling and let us see what a redeemed Albuquerque might look like, even in a glimpse here around this church. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us here online at Del Norte Baptist Church. We're so grateful you took the time. We want to just take a few moments and let you know what we're all about here. We sincerely believe that Jesus Christ, God in flesh, stepped into time, walked the lives that we walk, lived perfectly, and then gave that up for us. And for anyone and everyone that would put their faith in him, there is renewal, forgiveness, restoration, life as God intended. And that comes with the promise of eternal life, but it also comes with the promise of what God intends life to be like here. If that's something you want to know more about, please email me, philip@dnbc.org. That's Philip at Del Norte Baptist Church, dnbc.org. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.